Soon, the end will come.
With the release of Persona 5 coming up in the not too distant future, I feel it's worthwhile to look back at the title that established the cult fanbase of the future Persona games, and to a lesser extent the Shin Megami Tensei franchise. The Megami Tensei, or Rebirth of the Goddess in English, is a franchise of video games spanning decades from SMT's original release in 1987 to well into the 21st century. Being the one at the helm, Atlus has been able to make a long-lasting and consistent franchise, regardless of the times. Arguably the most important games in the entire franchise was 2004's Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, or Lucifer's Call. While Nocturne was not a massive RPG success in the year that brought out AAA games like World of Warcraft, KOTOR 2, and Fable, it was still able to carve out a fanbase of loyal followers, spurring on Atlus to translate and re-release more games stateside. Persona 3 was released on the PS2, which by 2007 was basically sentencing your game to the bargain bin within a few hours. But this was actually a very smart business move on Atlus's part. 07 had games like Mass Effect, Halo 3, Call of Duty 4, and Uncharted that would have pummeled the game with sales and advertisement on the then current hardware. The only well-received games released for the PS2 at the time was God of War 2 and Odin Sphere, a game which Atlus also made. The best games on the PS2 at the time would have included Persona 3, allowing it to receive critical attention and some financial success, but more importantly, the creation of a hardcore fanbase eager for more. Which you can't blame. Persona 3 is kinda fucking brilliant. Persona 3 combines well-trodden genres into something that feels highly original and engaging. Sure, in a few ways it was just improving the graphics of Persona 2, but good luck finding a copy of that game. Still, it's hard knowing where to start with a game that'll encompass hundreds of hours out of your life, but I'll imagine that the story will be a solid place to begin. You play as the main character, or MC, or canonically Minato Arisato, but nevertheless, you begin your journey with a pathetic quote that really summarizes what will follow. Arriving at Port Island City 10 years after your parents' death, you move into a dormitory before the beginning of the school year, all the while ignoring the weird shit happening around you, like the blood, the fake guns, and how the opening gave you some serious serial experiments lane deja vu. After getting introduced to your fellow high school classmates like Junpei, Yukari, Mitsuru, and Akihiko, most of whom already live with you at the dormitory, you find yourself attacked by an unholy monster at night. In what must be one of the most badass and memorable moments in the history of ever, you awaken your inner self.
Persona.
From the sea of thy soul I come. I am Orpheus, master of strings.
As it turns out, all the creepy shit happening is actually creepy shit. For reasons later explained in the story, there's a hidden 25th hour in the day, in which electronics shut down and humans become petrified within a coffin. Malicious beings called shadows awaken to hunt down any humans that remain active during this time. Titled The Dark Hour, it's clear that things are only getting worse for the average person, with more fearsome creatures roaming around causing more havoc. But those few who can resist the Dark Hour's influences have the potential to awaken their inner selves, or personas, allowing them to combat the shadows. Conveniently, the people you've been staying with have the potential and are part of a special extracurricular execution squad, or SEES. Get it? The job is to understand the cause of the Dark Hour and how to stop it. After witnessing your power and your ability to summon multiple personas, they persuade you to join their fight against the shadows, with you becoming the lead fighter for the group. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that, with plenty of revelations, intrigue, twists, dilemmas, and choices that confront you and your team. The game's narrative progress is broken up by a monthly system following the lunar calendar. Throughout a month, characters are expanded on, new ones are introduced to join your team, and more details of the world come to light. Not too long into the game, it becomes apparent that every full moon an extremely powerful shadow appears that could cause widespread carnage if left unchecked. After their defeat, the process more or less repeats, with various other events taking place between. The actual story of Persona 3 isn't particularly unique. It's another tale of teenagers working together using their friendship to save the day. If you watch anime, it's more or less the same. However, it's the characters that truly make Persona 3's narrative excellent. There are a few other games that are well so wrought in depth and detail with their characters as is Persona 3's. The progression and growth over time between you and your party feels infinitely more real than a majority of other RPGs that stick to cliché character archetypes with predictable resolutions that define them. The game begins introducing a straightforward cast of people. Yukari and Misuru are the first female members and don't act particularly interesting. You have your comic relief Junpei, voiced by the one and only Vic Mignogna, and Akihiko, voiced by Liam O'Brien, basically the Nolan North of English dubs. As the game progresses, conflicts, tribulations, challenges, good times and bad times really impact you and your party. Everyone changes, perspective on each other, why they fight this battle, and what defines them as individuals. A character like Junpei starts off as insufferably annoying and prickish, unwilling to accept a leader besides himself, but eventually he starts asking himself obvious questions. Why does he fight? To make himself feel important? Well, what happens after the dust has settled and he's just a totally normal dude in a now totally normal world? Yukari lacks the confidence in dragging people into this potentially lethal situation, takes in part to a rough past, making her seem cold, but sort of justifiably so. There are far more characters that come into focus as the story moves on. They're just as detailed and fleshed out as any other, with their own personalities, and also being strangely likable. These once uncertain strangers become real memorable allies by the game's climax, which is one of the story's best moments. When they're finally united under a similar cause really moves you emotionally. Now Persona 3 in all its entirety is broken into two halves. On one side, you have the very text-driven narrative, with you spending your time interacting with different characters, and the other half being the traditional dungeon crawling. You have two very different games on offer, yet the implementation is rather smooth. When you start, you're notified that you have a whole year before the game's conclusion. This is kind of false advertising. About 4 or 5 months are pretty much skipped through, with story events to suck up any free time. But for the other 7 to 8 months, you'll be spending your days at high school. Now, if you've ever played a dating sim or watched, I don't fucking know, School Days, then you already know how it generally progresses. You've got various people you can establish friendships with, called social links. Social links are pretty self-explanatory. They're your emotional bonds with people, each one representing a unique arcana. Now, in the Persona universe, arcanas represent a stage in an individual's life. The vanilla game contains 20 links, some growing through the story's progression, while most requiring your limited time. To give you an idea, one of your first social links you'll establish almost immediately is with Kenji, who represents the Magician Arcana, a novice at life, which is the main theme of his story. Now, the social link with the head of the student council, Hidetoshi, who's very serious and is heavily based on authority, represents the Emperor Arcana. The Arcanas don't change the plot so much as your usage of personas in the turn-based battle portion of the game, which I'll get into. But if you ignore the persona-wielding perspective and focus on the stories of the various people throughout the world, you're rewarded with some highly compelling side stories that only enrich the main game instead of detracting from it. Each day after school, you can spend your afternoon improving a social link, a lot of them being your fellow classmates and even some party members. If you're bored at the thought of interacting with high school teenage drama, you can mingle with the folks from outside the school. It'll take most of your game before you've unlocked every social link, so at first you're pretty limited in options, but more become accessible by improving pre-existing links. Join the Sports Club gives you access to 3. 2 of them are almost immediately available, while the third one is in the latter half of the game. This can be rather annoying since the more interesting and beneficial ones are blocked by less interesting and beneficial ones, which I'm guessing was an intended choice to balance the game's difficulty as well as the pacing. But your limited time might mean totally ignoring some links, which can result in missing out on far better ones. Spending your Sundays playing an Easter egg of an MMO with a total weeaboo ain't that fun, but it's the only way you can unlock the Devil's Social Link, one of the only 2 links available at night, as well as being one of the most powerful arcanas in the game. Some social links require you to be at a certain level with your stats, these being intelligence, courage, and charm. Certain characters require you to be at a certain level in one or more of these stats to establish a bond. For example, Fuka, the Priestess Arcana, demands your courage to be at the badass level before you can eat her food. You can upgrade these traits via alternative activities either during the day or night. Improving your intelligence can be done via studying at the library or before going to sleep. Charm may involve drinking coffee like a boss, and courage can be done with karaoke, of course. The stats part of the game isn't implemented very well. Weird stuff like answering the right question at school reward you with charm instead of intelligence, which just seems wrong. It takes a long time going to activity, upgrading one particular stat you need for like 1 or 2 people. It gets more annoying since it doesn't impact anything other than barring you from specific links. Neither courage, charm, or intelligence impact the combat in any way or change the direction of the story. Okay, fine, intelligence does improve your test scores, but that's a lot of effort for just about fuck all. But really, my biggest gripe with Persona 3's social links is how to properly organize them. It's hard figuring out what you're doing right or wrong. You have a calendar as well as the moon phases to give you an idea of what's coming up, but frequently story events will just appear and consume your entire day. But so if you're planning to hang out with some school chums to boost your relationship, tough shit, you've got to watch a 20-minute cutscene, or better yet, the next week is completely hands-off. You can make some plans, like hanging out during the holidays, though my suspension of disbelief is stretched pretty thin by the lack of social media in the year 2009. I don't remember anyone calling me then. Or ever, really. Though the biggest problem people will have with the narrative portion of the game is how much fucking text there is. Everywhere you go there's dialogue of some sort. I like this in the where the world is fleshed out with small, passive storylines like a relationship between 2 nameless people that takes the entire game before getting anywhere. But damn, you'll break a couple of controllers thanks to the constant text scrolling requiring a button press to continue. The main story is mostly voiced, but everything else is purely dialogue. If it's not seriously plot relevant, you're gonna have to make the voices in your head, which gets really exhausting at the 80+ hour mark. But you have to give credit to the translation. The English grammar is pretty much spot on with clever usage of colloquialisms, rhymes, jokes, and puns that often get lost in the language conversion process, i.e. most 90s anime. It's pretty easy to understand why this game took over a year to ship stateside. Though for a lot of players, this metric ton of words will only turn them off, but honestly, if anyone were to play Persona 3, they already know this. This is mostly a personal note, but the world you can explore is very immersive. It's small but detailed, and you can see incredible art design behind each of the game's locations. You're encouraged to explore the city by Margaret's many strange requests. These are accepted at the Velvet Room. They usually involve something wacky and humorous, like obtaining medical woo from a friend or feeding a stray cat. Special note to the soundtrack, which I think is incredible. It's a mix of J-pop and J-rock, orchestral pieces, and some vocal pieces, which I think come together exceedingly well, emphasizing each and every story plot point, which isn't easy with a game packed with this much story. The other half of the game is what most Shin Megami Tensei games are known for, turn-based combat with various fusible demons. You spend the majority of combat in the Tower of Tartarus, clearing out floors to find the staircase leading to the next level. This is a big tower with over 300 floors packed with enemies and items. The floors are all randomized, some small, some large, some contain lots of items and shadows, while others contain few or even none. Levels are sectioned off into blocks, each one containing a unique aesthetic art style, shadow types, and music. After a few dozen floors, you'll be barred from the next block or section of the block until the next full moon. The thought of tackling dozens of floors in one go sounds pretty exhausting. Thankfully, there's the occasional boss floor that contains a teleporter you can activate, working as a fast travel point between that area and the ground floor, where you can save, replenish your stats, and switch out your team members. Unlike a lot of RPGs, you actually have some control over entering battles. That slow-moving blob represents a small or large group of enemies, depending on their size. To engage them, you slap them with the weapon you're equipped with. An element in Persona 3's battles is who strikes first. If you attack the shadow without it being a loaded MGS style, then your party gets to attack first. This also goes vice versa if the enemy jumps you. Now you're at the disadvantage and can get severely fucked. Your party's actions are fairly straightforward. Each member has special skills and abilities they can either use on the opposition or your fellow teammates. Because of their personas, they have certain strengths and weaknesses. One may be resistant against wind elemental attacks while weak to fire. Someone else may be great at electric or physical attacks but are worthless at everything else. While everyone can attack with physical weapons if you want to conserve MP, they're only good at one particular weapon type, so you can't just swap out Aigis' autocannon for an axe. Now you yourself can use the majority of weapons throughout the game. The weapon type you're equipped with can greatly affect a fight, inside and out. Bows are great at a distance, but inflict little damage. A rapier might not hit as hard as say a katana, but attacks faster, improving your chances at getting the first attack in. Because of this, most players will probably stick to the short swords for most of the game. I say most since you do have those Margaret requests that require you to track down golden shadows, which can only be engaged with a bow. Fuck these guys. Seriously, fuck Margaret and her stupid golden hand quests. Now your character is a bit of a wild card in how they can swap in and out different personas with different strengths and weaknesses. This makes you the balancing force in fights. Your limited 4-party roster forces you to make up any potential physical and elemental weaknesses. Shadows are similar in how they're very strong in some combat areas while very weak in others. Sometimes it's obvious stuff like ice elemental based enemies being vulnerable to fire. Of course, this can change with some later enemies and bosses who lack any real faults. These guys are the ones who cause you the most grief, but by then you'll have a far greater variety of defensive and offensive attacks. If you or the enemy use a weakness against another, the user will gain another turn, effectively allowing them to chain attacks with devastating results. You can easily exploit every enemy's weakness to get consecutive turns, pretty much ending a fight in a single round. If someone is critically hit by a physical attack or a spell they're weak to, they go down for a turn. If you can get every enemy down at the same time, your party can pull off an all-out attack where they smash the enemy, inflicting heavy damage. You've probably noticed by now they don't control your teammates. As the team leader, you can issue basic tactics to other characters. This is easily the biggest blemish in the combat system because your AI ain't that good. Obvious attack patterns are lost on them. Their special attacks are all fire-based, the weakness of all the enemies you're fighting, fuck it, just punch them. Simple stuff like healing you is fine, but don't expect them to use a skill that raises your team's attack power or agility, or even lower the enemy's defense. That burden falls on you. Speaking of which, buff skills have been significantly balanced. Where in Nocturne you can easily beef up your party with Sukuhaja and Takuhaja skills, now only specific high-level personas will be able to give you a real edge. Speaking of Nocturne, you could control your entire party there, and the combat worked fine. What's worse, the tactics you can actually issue have to be unlocked. So basic stuff like ordering your team members to target the enemy's weakness is only available deeper into the game. Did I mention the boss flaws contain a boss? Well, they do, and it's these points you're likely to get stuck. Because even at higher levels, they are brutal, mostly because they'll hit you hard, requiring a good combination of skills to win. Did I mention Persona 3 is a hard game? Because it is a hard game. If your main character dies, the game ends, forcing you to reload a save game. While this is very frustrating, it's not as bad as dying during a full moon operation, having to rewatch a shit ton of cutscenes and dialogue to get another shot at winning. Your persona is the most powerful asset you can have, so creating the best persona via a combo of various arcanas is a necessity in the game. Now let's talk about the fusion system, a crazy mix of Pokemon and demons. Persona 3's fusion system is nothing new to the SMT franchise, but it has been expanded upon. The fusion system is easily what will trouble new players the most. Health points, mana points, critical hits, and equipment selection is fairly self-explanatory stuff. You can fuse personas at the Velvet Room. Initially, you can only fuse a couple at a time, but later you can fuse over half a dozen. The basics are that a fusion between personas creates another with similar traits. So if you fuse 3 physical-based personas, you'll likely obtain a physical-based persona. But it's really making the best fusion combination of skills, since some can be passed on to a new persona. This can be extremely helpful. If a resulting persona's weakness is death, but one of the fusion's ingredients contains a null death, you can pass it on, disabling that persona's weakness. This becomes incredibly important in the later levels where the enemies will do their best to exploit any and all ailments in your party. Be aware of the persona arcana when fusing, because if you've established a social link with that arcana, the persona will receive an EXP boost after being formed, giving you early access to the higher level skills and attacks. You can see what the fusion result is going to be, but whether they're effective or not can only be proven in battle. Here's my advice, fuse early and often. You can pick up basic personas through a card shuffle at the end of some fights, as well as money and status buffs. These personas are weak and lack their best abilities, but make great fusion fodder, since besides winning them in cards, you can always buy previously unlocked personas through the compendium, which you'll find extremely helpful and expensive. They're added automatically once you obtain them, but if you want to save a persona's level before a fusion, you gotta remember to register them. This will increase their price in the compendium, but it means you can hold onto skills without losing them by a fusion. One of Persona 3's biggest flaws is probably its weak economy. Initially you're extremely poor, so you're probably going to spend a couple of hours retreating Tartarus for loot drops. But you really don't need to. After battle, card shuffles can net you weapons you can either keep or sell. After the first couple of blocks, chests will often net you tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of yen you can use buying armor, weapons, and other items. At first the compendium seems pricey, but you'll be flush with so much cash there won't be anything to spend it on besides fusing overpowered personas. It doesn't break the game, but it lingers across the entire journey and weakens the value of the more valuable items. Yeah, I'm gonna address the fact that the graphics aren't amazing, but they have a charming appeal and artistic design you'll quickly fall in love with. In other words, they were very outdated for the PS2. Now that more or less does it for the original release. Persona 3 FES is what most will play, with it being far less expensive to track down and its re-release on the PSN. Containing the main game as well as an expansion called The Answer, it's the definitive edition. The vanilla game has additional side quests, Persona fusions, and a much better payoff for the social links. It's not going to change your mind on the game, but completionists will appreciate the thematic improvements. However, I was disappointed they didn't speed up the gameplay, the dialogue still takes forever to get through, and the absence of a Japanese dub was a real letdown. It would have made the game a lot more authentic to play. The Answer is a real mixed bag for a lot of folks. Continuing on from the main game, some will claim it was a satisfying conclusion, while others see it as a real betrayal with how they handled the characters. It's a long expansion, so I'm not talking about it here, but I will say it's definitely not necessary to play through unless you really want more Persona 3. Shit. Do I have anything else to say? Well, Persona 3 is one of those rare, highly involving experiences you just don't see in games and fiction as a whole. When you spend a few hundred hours with a piece of media, it's hard to articulate how you feel towards it objectively. But I like to feel I did the best job anyone could with a game like Persona 3, but it was no simple task. Persona 3 established the franchise within the gaming community, with Persona 4 cementing itself as a legitimate piece of pop culture, though rather niche. Got a PS2, a PSP, a PS3? Snag it. Persona 3 is well worth the effort, and then some, but chances are you already know that.